Hello and welcome to Euranet Plus. Today we focus on the ongoing war in eastern Ukraine, despite the ceasefire agreement between Russia and Ukraine in Minsk on February 15th. What is the EU dealing with this conflict and how are the EU member states dealing against Russia? Are they too weak against Mr. Putin? This is the debate of today, and for this I have the pleasure to welcome two members of the European Parliament. Ana Gomes, you are a socialist, Portuguese and socialist member in the European Parliament. Hello.
Hello.
And Mrs. Anna Fotyga, you're a Polish member from the European Conservatives and Reformists group.
Good morning. Hello.
And we also joined by another Polish lady, Magdalena, who is a journalist partner from Polska Radio.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. So, despite the ceasefire agreement, which in February, so around 10 days ago, the fighting still continues and people are still dying. So, weapons are not drifted off from the front line as promised. So, Mrs. Gomes, is this ceasefire failed?
I think so. It is obvious from the facts that you have highlighted. And we have just been receiving yesterday the speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, and he was addressing to us a request that we would support a peacekeeping operation in eastern Ukraine, a UN or a European one. I guess a UN could be vetoed by Russia, but Europe should indeed listen to this request, it's my opinion, and indeed act to put some force there that would indeed keep the peace. It's not about war. We don't want war. Mr. Putin wants war. We don't want war. Mm-hmm. But definitely we have to do more to support Ukraine against this aggression by Russia that is unfortunately led by a warmonger like Mr. Putin.
Mrs. Fotyga, are the EU member states acting too softly against Russia?
Well, we have to take into account history as well. Actually, I still remember 10 years ago when we engaged in discussing the PCA with Russian Federation, and then the aim of a majority of member states to engage in good relations with Russia. It was visible already then by strategic documents of Russia that this country wants to regain this sphere of influence, at least in former sphere of influence of the Soviet bloc, so meaning our region, Central and Eastern Europe. But actually, in my opinion, now the situation is more dangerous as Russia uses various means of influence, also vis-à-vis Western world. Actually, the information war is already broader than Ukraine only. It touches other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, but it also has huge influence in Western countries. So we have to remain united. And yes, in my opinion, we should be a bit more tough.
Yeah, we have to be ready. Magdalena.
So then the question is whether the European Union is ready to get tougher now. Ms. Gomes mentioned the speaker of the Verkhovna Rada yesterday at the European Parliament, who also called for more sanctions, strengthened sanctions. We know that there are consultations ongoing led by the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. We know that the upcoming summit will also be focused on future measures against Russia. But is the European Union really ready to get tougher on Russia right now?
Well, the question is, what kind of European Union do we have? Is this the European Union that was negotiating at Minsk 10 days ago, a few days ago? Was it old Europe or indeed Europe? Yeah. Is it old Europe versus old Russia? I don't want that. I want Europe that is indeed true to its values and purposes, definitely engaged in peace, but of course standing up against aggression. And it was clear that Ukraine was aggressed by Russia. I have no preconceived ideas against Russia. I wanted Russia to be part of the countries that uphold international law, but it's not what is happening clearly. And I could say, indeed, since Georgia invasion in 2008, we can see that aggressive mood on the part of Russia, and now it's very clear in Ukraine. And so I return the question back to you. This is not just about Ukraine. It's about what kind of Europe do we have? Is it all Europe? Or are we standing united and indeed barring aggression and not wanting war, but definitely not accepting the aggression and supporting Ukraine as it should be supported?
But we know that this unity when it comes to especially economic sanctions is particularly
of course,
difficult.
And again, history may come. I can imagine that several European countries, also because of the ties they have developed with Russia on the energy sector, but in other economic sectors, of course, have all sorts of trends or perspectives. But I hope that indeed basic values of Europe, and this is about indeed peace in our continent, should prevail.
Mrs. Fotyga, if violence continues, arming Ukraine should be the next step?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, the answer is yes.
And you, Mrs. Gomes?
Yes, Ukraine needs the equipment to defense. Ukraine asks for support in training and medical assistance, and I think that member states should consider this instead of thinking about selling arms or offensive weapons to the Russian Federation. Now it is. Luckily, it's temporarily over, because I think that Russia uses all these means for aggression for many years already, since, as Anna Gomes told rightly, since Georgia.
This could escalate the conflict.
Absolutely, and that's why we need to be careful. But I agree that Ukraine has the right to defend itself and has the right to procure the means to defend itself. But, of course, I understand that we don't want, indeed, to escalate. And by the way, we don't have anything against the Russian people. It's also about what kind of Russia is this one.
May I add also?
Yes, I want to mention also Cameron, who just said that maybe the idea of sending military experts on the ground, that would be maybe the softer
Experts
option.
are there because there is EUAM mission already there, and in my opinion, the recent announcement by Cameron to send training contingent is very valuable. But I would like to say about escalation and de-escalation. We have to know Russia, and certainly we in Central and Eastern Europe know Russia. And Putin understands the very concise language of strength, meaning that we have also to deter Russia, and to the contrary, showing that we are hesitant. We always talk about de-escalation, while Russia just buys time for further escalation means weakness.
The recorded question from our Estonian journalist partner, Liz Amor, who is just talking about the real danger that Baltic states can face.
Hello, I am Liis Amor from Sky Media, Estonia. It is nice to meet you. Here is my question to you. UK's Defence Secretary Michael Fallon claims that Vladimir Putin could repeat tactics used to destabilize Ukraine in Baltic states, in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which are in the NATO. So my question is how seriously we must take that statement. Thank you.
Mrs. Fotyga, is there a real danger of uncover operation in the Baltic states?
Observing the activity of the Russian Federation for many years already, yes, I share this view. Moreover, I think the danger is much broader, not only focused on Baltic states, but maybe UK official know more about the sequence of events.
And you, Mrs. Gomes?
Well, there have been statements as well by NATO officials, top officials, hinting at that. So also knowing the history, we should not only understand the concerns of the people from the Baltic states, but indeed the actual threats. And yes, they are a possibility. And I think Article 5 of NATO is very relevant.
I think that already capturing of the Secret Service officers, Estonian, on the border was the very bad sign some time ago.
So we have to be ready and maybe more cooperate in Europe. And actually we have a Facebook comment. One comment of Valerie Xavier Lenz, who wrote that with a federal Europe, Putin will not play chess with each member state like he does now. He also added that with a European army, Putin will show more respect for Europe because for him, the member states are divided between the interests of each nation. So we mentioned here the creation of a European army, a big issue because of the cost of it and the interest of each member state. So, Mrs. Gomes, is a European army
I'm absolutely for a federal Europe, and when I earlier mentioned the old Europe, it is exactly the kind of Europe I don't want, but which I see still very much the one playing around. But that said, I don't think that we're going to have an army, a European army, just overnight. We should use the existing mechanisms of CSDP, Common Security and Defense Policy, and CFSP, the Common Foreign and Security Policy, to actually guide us in their action regarding support for Ukraine and defense against aggression coming from Putin's Russia.
I'm totally against federal Europe, in particular now, and Minsk agreements and the attitude of major EU member states vis-à-vis Russia for many years already show that this policy was wrong, and therefore I will not like the subordinating the security of my people in Poland to wrong ideas of other countries.
Yeah, but a divided Europe, and the one speaking with several voices and with several interests, and namely with the mercantilist interests playing the front role, is exactly what is convenient to an aggressor like Mr. Putin.
So unfortunately, we will need to end up the program. So in 30 seconds, each of you, I will ask you, your last word from against this conflict, and what is the EU impact?
I think the EU could also impact by helping Ukraine reform itself, and in particular empowering civil society and new politicians who want to indeed build democratic Ukraine, and one which fights against corruption. And it's a fight which is as much about us as them, because there were clear links between the corruption that was going on in Ukraine in the days of Yanukovych and the corruption abetted in European countries. So this is an area where I believe we need to do more, and as well as humanitarian support. But all the most important things are everything that has to do with political reform in Ukraine.
And for you, Mrs. Fotyga, the most important thing against this conflict?
Surely we have to empower society. We have to help Ukraine reform, but we have also to know that combining the major challenges, defending the country and reforming in the same time may endanger the whole process itself. We have to be very careful about requirements to reform and take into account also possibility of endangering this process by, for example, putting additional stress on Ukrainian society. They are already impoverished. There are many refugees. We should think about the ways we impose these criteria.
Thank you, Mrs., for coming, and thank you, Magdalena, also. And thank you all for watching. See you next time. Bye.